Okay, this is Mr. Davis. We're actually going to be looking at a different PowerPoint here. So this is all about like the United States getting into the war here. So we might bounce back and forth between two PowerPoints. So this is Wednesday's homework. So what you are going to have coming up. So this is Wednesday's lecture. Thursday, I'm going to give you a prompt for an essay. The essay is going to be about the Americans coming into the war, what their effect was. Do you believe that the Allies would have won the war without the Americans, or did the Americans, were they the only reason why the Allies were able to beat the Germans? So that you'll get a prompt and you'll be able to start it on Thursday. It's pretty much what your task is going to be, is to kind of research about your essay. So not a ton of listen to Mr. Davis or book work. You're just going to be doing some research at your own pace. Friday, we're going to have a vocab quiz. You turn this image glossary in about World War One. I think like right before we went on spring break, like weeks ago. It seems like forever ago. But you turn that in, and so that's what the quiz is going to be on. I think it's 25 words, so it'll be a 25-point verbatim vocab quiz. If you can't get a 25 out of 25, I don't know what to do to help you there, because you got your book, you have your image glossary. There's no time on this Google form, so just get a 25 out of 25. Do me a favor so I can put all 25s in. Now, everybody's pretty much doing a great job. You don't want to fall into the trap at the end of this kind of last couple of weeks of just not doing your work. I don't have much sympathy for people that maybe take a week off of work, because guess what? Everybody else is working hard. We don't have time. I don't have time to catch you back up because you decided to take a week off. So it will pile up on you, and I don't have sympathy for just falling behind. So figure out a way and get it done. I do have sympathy that this is new to us and you're making an effort. But if you decide, hey, I just didn't do my work for a week, can you give me some extensions? Sorry, that was my Mr. Davis buzzer. Just take the L, I guess. But I don't have, like I said, I don't have much sympathy for just slacking off because you don't want to work hard. All right, so that being said, so Wednesday's a lecture. Thursday, I'm going to give you an essay prompt to work on. It'll probably be doing like Monday at 9 o'clock. And then Friday will be your quiz. Shouldn't take you very much time at all. And then work on your essay a little bit. All right, so we're going to be looking at two things: why the United States came in, and naval warfare. And we're going to go back to that war channel here in a little bit. All right, so one thing we haven't talked about too much, like just looking at the three main dogs here. President Woodrow Wilson, we talked about him a little bit, how he kept us out of war was his slogan in 1916. He is the U.S. president. Winston Churchill is the leader of Great Britain, one of the most famous country leaders ever of all time, of any country. Winston Churchill. We'll learn a lot about him, even more in World War II. Kaiser Wilhelm is either William or Wilhelm. Is properly Wilhelm II. He is the leader of Germany, as you know. Okay, so we know a lot of this will be a little bit of review here. So we know the wars was between 14 and 1918. Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife get shot to death by a Serbian member. The Austrians wage war on Serbia. Serbia gets backed up by Russia. Austria gets backed up by Germany. And next thing we know, all hell's broken loose. We're just going to skip this. We'll talk about it a little bit. The Central Powers, you'll see a good map here. Germany, Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire, country named Bulgaria, the Entente, the friendly powers that were friendly with one another, France, the United Kingdom, and Russia. Now, Russia is always what we would consider a strange bedfellow. And what does that mean, Mr. Davis? It means sometimes you have to make deals with people that it's strange that you would be making a deal with them. So think of like if you have maybe somebody that you don't get along with, but you need a ride home from practice, and that person's the only person there. you don't really get along with that person, but it's better to have an awkward 5-minute car ride than it is to wait for your mom for another hour. So strange bedfellows mean like, wow, they're on this side. So yes, Russia, France, and the United Kingdom were all together. This will be more strange bedfellows in World War II. It will definitely be different because Russia is not it's basically a dictatorship. They have a czar in Russia. The people hate the czar. Russia, it's just not a fun country to live in the early 1900s because the czar just made people do whatever the heck they wanted. They were called serfs. And that's kind of a topic a little bit later on. But those were the powers. Okay, here's the people that are neutral. Basically, the only big one here is the United States. Switzerland is always neutral. The Netherlands up in Northern Europe, not really like a big world power or anything like that. In Spain, after the Spanish-American War and the end of the 19th century, Spain kind of ceased being a world power. So really, what they're fighting for is the United States. So this is a little bit of a color-coded map. It's kind of not the best color-coded, but this reddish pink area, this is called the Central Powers, Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Turkey, which is the Ottoman Empire. The greenish kind of beige powers there, those are the Entente powers. Going too fast here. France, Britain, United Kingdom, and Russia. And then the really beige over here, those are the people that are not choosing a side. And the United States is not in this. And the United States not being on this map is noteworthy because the United States, we've always had that great location because we have the Atlantic and the Pacific on either side of us. So nobody outside of Mexico and Canada can really just send their army straight into our country. They would have to sail over here. And really, we only get attacked 2 times in history on our land. And I would ask Ryan Siegel, what 2 times was that? Okay, yes, Pearl Harbor is one, 1941, Pearl Harbor. And if I ask Bentley, what was the other time we got attacked? You are correct. When we got attacked in 9/11, September 11th, 2001. All right, so why was the United States neutral? So for several reasons. Many German immigrants living in the United States. Raise your hand right now if you have German immigrants. Come on, don't be lazy. I know I'm not in your room, but raise your hand if you have German heritage. Okay, so there's many German immigrants living in the United States. There's also a lot of Irish immigrants. Raise your hand if you have some Irish blood. I do. Hence my little red-headed tykes, Will and Kevin. Both your wife and you, both people have to have the red-headed gene to have redheads. So my wife's mother has red hair. So that's how we were able to have some redheads. So the Irish immigrants were anti-British. They did not like the British. They broke away from Great Britain a long time ago, and they don't like the British. They also realized, this is a big one, they could profit off of selling supplies to both sides. President Wilson also strongly opposed going to war. 1916 was an election year, just like this is an election year in 2020. What the heck's going to happen in November? COVID-19 will definitely play a role in this coming up election. Well, the big thing in 1916 was World War I. His slogan was, he kept us out of war. So he went out of his way, really, to keep the United States out of war. Also, we're too far away to notice the effects of the battles. This was not a total war in the United States at this point. It's similar to today. You know, if I asked you what country are we at war in today, a lot of you guys wouldn't know that technically we're still at war in Afghanistan right now. It's like the longest war in American history. So we're not affected by it. Unfortunately, we don't, even think about all the soldiers still losing their lives today in Afghanistan. We talked about one of the things that countries wanted to do to be superior in war was they wanted to build a big navy. So this guy, Alfred Mahan, he was actually an American admiral, and he says that in order to be the most powerful country in the world, you had to have the best navy in the world. And the Kaiser of Germany read it, and he gets jacked up after he reads it, and he starts building up his fleet. And basically, what he's doing, we go back here real quick. So Germany is right here. They're across the North Sea from England. So Germany starts building up their fleet of warships, and England sees this. They know that's going on, and they start kind of getting a little bit worried about Germany building up their fleet. And this was someone in Great Britain. It was John, kind of difficult to say, John Arbuthnot Fisher, Great Britain's first Sea Lord from 1904 to 1910. He was responsible for the design of the revolutionary warship, the HMS Dreadnought, sacrificed armor for speed. The only thing in the world England has to fear is Germany. The Germans and Navy Minister Admiral Alfred von Tirpitz strengthened their fleet. So it's going to be clear that there's going to be some battles on the seas. Early in the 20th century, Germany began a huge campaign of strengthening its navy, trying to equal Great Britain's Royal Navy. Great Britain answered their campaign by strengthening the Royal Navy. Winston Churchill, again, we saw back then. The Admiralty has demanded 6 ships. The Economists offered 4. We finally compromised on 8. So just look at this. What do you think this tells you about? So Winston Churchill's kind of in charge of the armed forces, so to speak, in Great Britain. What does this tell you about his attitude? Probably tells you that he's really focused on being the strongest country in the world in terms of military. He says the Admiralty demanded 6 ships. The Economists, that's kind of another way for the saying, the politicians said, well, you're going to have 4. And then Winston Churchill said, yeah, we'll just do 8. 8 sounds good. All right. So many new battleships that were created, which this was a little bit more a different color here, but the battle cruiser, torpedo boat, destroyers, submarines. Submarines are going to be kind of the really new age thinking in this war. As submarines, the Germans called them U-boats for underwater boats. They could approach under fire and fire a missile safely away from enemy fire. What goes on here? As the British start building up their navy, as the Germans start building up their navy, the British starts getting freaked out a little bit, and they said, you know what? We're going to use our navy to blockade you, Germany. And a blockade, just going back to my map here, a blockade, what we mean by this is they basically put a C. So I'm trying to teach Will his letters right now in Davis preschool. So if you put like a C around here, like the letter C, a blockade would be blocking any goods from coming into Germany. And that would be really detrimental to the Germans who are trying to get goods from the United States at this point, maybe from some other areas like Spain, Portugal possibly. But the British are blockading the North Sea, and this is could have just went to the next slide here. Germany, they're going to fight back. Germany's not going to take this just sitting down. They say, well, if you are going to block us, so this light blue here is the North Sea blockade, says, you know what, if you're going to block us, guess what we're going to do, bros? We're going to start blowing up your ships. And so they started building these underwater ships, these U-boats, and they declared unrestricted submarine warfare February 4th, 1915. So from February 18th, the water around Great Britain, except for a designated route north of Scotland, would be a war zone in which all enemy ships would be destroyed. Neutral vessels will in most cases be unrecognizable and therefore destroyed like any other warship. German U-boatsmen declared, we are indeed the masters of the sea. So this is a cause and effect. The British blockade the North Sea. The effect is, all right, fellas, there's all's fair in love and war. We are going to start blowing up your ships. And this is an important part of this, kind of declaration by the Germans. They said neutral vessels will, in most cases, not be recognizable. Therefore, we will destroy them like any other warship. Winston Churchill, he actually kind of in a way, he kind of liked this by the Germans because he was kind of itching to get more public support, and he actually wanted the Americans to join the war earlier than they did. But he says it's most important to attract neutral shipping to our shores in the hope of especially of embroiling the United States with Germany. For our part, we want the traffic, the more the better, and if some of this gets into trouble, better still. So this is Winston Churchill. You could argue that's a pretty reckless statement there. So what a historian could say, like kind of put that in Cliff Notes version of that big long quote, is basically saying, you know what, we're not going to tell anybody not to ship to Great Britain. We want them to come to Great Britain, and if they get shot, that's just going to make people hate the Germans even more. So he knew that some passenger ships were going to get shot down, and most specifically, it's going to be the Lusitania. So here's the Lusitania. It was launched on June 7th, 1906, so it's right at the same time of the Titanic. I believe the Titanic goes down in 1912. I'll correct that fact if I got it wrong. Its maiden voyage, the first time it ever left the dock, was in 1907. It was 785 feet long. So to put that in perspective, that is nearly 3 football fields. That's pretty crazy. 88 feet wide, so really long and narrow. Its net tonnage, it could carry over 12,000 pounds. It had 25 boilers and 4 boiler rooms. They had 192 furnaces and just under 100 tons of coal. So that's pretty crazy. They used 100 tons of coal per day. That's wild. They had just other things. And accommodation, designed passenger accommodation, that just means how many people could be comfortably accommodated, like how many people could sail aboard the Lusitania. The total of 2,200 people. So that is like taking one Campbell County and then also adding Brossard and NCC to Campbell County High School. That's how many people could sail on the Lusitania. And you might think, wow, that'd be kind of a fun, wild boat ride with Campbell County, Brossard, and NCC on one boat. That's kind of the amount of people that could be carried. They had a crew of about 850 people. That's pretty crazy. Galley capacity, that means how many meals they can make per day. They make 10,000 meals on the Lusitania a day. So why the heck am I talking about the Lusitania? And the reason is, if you can hear it's coming, it's a torpedo, and it's going to blow the heck out of this Lusitania. All right, so we're going to get to that. But now Winston Churchill had said, we want more ships to come to our shores. But the Germans had said, this is a war zone. And you often get this, like sometimes if you've gone to a haunted house, you might see this sign outside the front door of a haunted house. And it says, enter at your own risk. Well, anybody getting aboard the Lusitania should know that they're entering at their own risk. Because the Germans, this is a newspaper ad. So it used to be back in the day, there was newspapers. And I think I've already had this lecture about how newspapers are going away. But the Germans actually published an ad in the New York Times at that point, as the New York Times. It says, notice, travelers intended to embark on the Atlantic voyage are reminded that a state of war exists between Germany and her allies, Great Britain and her allies. That the zone of war includes the waters adjacent to the British Isles, that in accordance with formal notice given by the Imperial German government, vessels flying in the flag of Great Britain or any of her allies are liable to destruction in those waters, and that the travelers sailing in this war zone on ships on Great Britain or her allies do so at their own risk. This was sent April 22nd, 1915. So if you got aboard of the Lusitania, you should know you are entering at your own risk. So the fateful voyage of the Lusitania. Lusitania headed to Fastnet Rock, which is off the southern coast of Ireland. On May 5th and 6th, German U-boats were very active in this same region. A message went out to all ships in this region. Submarines are active off the southern coast of Ireland. So basically saying, if you are sailing through here, you're coming through a war zone. I don't know about you, but I I wouldn't just take a vacation to Afghanistan and walk down the street right now. Probably wouldn't be somewhere I would put on my bucket list because it's a war zone. All right. But unfortunately, for all the people aboard, 1,260 dead, according to this New York Times article. What happens is they get shot down by a German torpedo. On May 7th, 1915, the RMS Lusitania was sunk off the southern coast of Ireland, making its way from New York City. Torpedoed by German submarine U-20 under the command of U-boat Captain Walter Schweiger, sank in 18 minutes. This is a really important fact here. There was when all the dust settled, they said 1,198 fatalities, including 128 Americans. So 128 Americans lost their lives in the frigid waters off the coast of Ireland by this U-boat being shot. It was shot by Germans. We know that. It sank in 18 minutes. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie The Titanic, but the Titanic hits an iceberg, as you know, and it eventually sinks. But it takes, again, I'll see how long. I'll try to put this into that puzzle, how many minutes it takes the Titanic to sink. This bad boy sunk in 18 minutes. And what does that tell you, my good friends? And it tells you that they were probably carrying a whole heck of a lot of gunpowder on this ship. So what the British were doing is that they were buying gunpowder, bombs, missiles from the United States, and they were sailing it, and that technically made the Lusitania a warship. Even though it was carrying passengers, they were secretly carrying ammunition aboard a passenger ship, which is against the rules of warfare. And that the Germans are going to argue that hey, why are we going to be the bad guys when they were technically cheating too? So in 18 minutes, this whole thing goes down to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. 128 fatalities. But it is important to know that the United States does not go into war after Lusitania is shot down. Wilson, though horrified by murder on the high seas, is what he is quoted to say, he writes a letter of notes to a protest. He sent notes to protest to Germany. Sorry, I kind of got tongue-tied there. So basically, today would be like sending them a text. Like, don't do this, guys. We don't want any trouble. Please don't do this. So he didn't say this is an act of war. We're going to retaliate against Germany. This was 1915, so he didn't want the Americans to go to war before he got reelected. Wilson, Secretary of State, wanted protests lodged against both Germans and the British. Bryan argued that the Lusitania carried munitions and therefore was a legitimate target. Relying on passengers for protection against an attack was like putting women and children in front of an army. So he's saying, this man, Bryan, was the Secretary of State, and he says, you know what? The Lusitania was a warship. So actually both Germany and the British are at fault here. All right, so this won't play. I'm just going to click on this link. I don't think it'll play anymore. It's a pretty cool video. Nope, it won't play. But we have this to play for us. So we are going to look at when the United States actually comes to war.
Been coming for a while, but now it's finally here. This week, 100 years ago, the United States joins the war. I'm Indy Nidell. Welcome to the Great War. Last week, the Toplica rebellion against Central Powers' occupation was finally crushed in the Balkans. Russia is still in a state of uncertainty after the February Revolution, and the Germans sent Vladimir Lenin there from Switzerland to foment more dissent. In the Middle East, a battle took place at Gaza that resulted in a British defeat. Here's what followed. For 2 months, German unrestricted submarine warfare has been sinking shipping of any nation and any kind, and that continued. On the 1st, the American steamer Aztec was torpedoed and 28 of the crew drowned. The following day, President Woodrow Wilson asked Congress to declare war on Germany. On the 4th, the Senate voted 82-6 to go to war, and on the 6th, the House of Representatives voted 373-50 to go to war, and the United States of America was now officially in a state of war
Tell me if this
with the
sounds
German
okay.
Empire.
Sorry.
That
Sounds like
day,
for
91
severe
German
cares.
ships were seized in
shit.
American ports. The U.S.
Should we
fleet was
recording?
mobilized.
I can fix it. I know what to do. Let's see.
I assumed you weren't when you started talking to me.
I know, it was stupid of me.
Sorry.
I sent it to Dave because he said, Chris, just send me an email, whatever you're going to tell your team, so I can just forward it to my team.
Who's Dave Meyer said that?
So I sent it. He's like, dude, I was just joking. Just give me a thumbs up or thumbs down if you think it's good or bad. I'm going to start it.
And the Naval Reserve was called to colors. Congress voted an emergency war fund of $100 million. That's $3.7 billion in today's money. Getting men and material to Europe was going to take a lot of time and organization, but the wheels were now in motion. Although many Americans were, in fact, already fighting the war. Some had joined the British or Canadian armies, some flew for the French in the Lafayette Escadrille, or had enlisted in the French Foreign Legion. The European fighting had actually been relatively quiet for 3 months, but that would soon change. On April 6, France's military and political leaders gathered in President Poincaré's railway car to discuss General Robert Nivelle's upcoming offensive that he believed would win the war. They weren't there to talk about the planning, though, but whether the offensive would even happen at all. French Minister of War Paul Painlevé was pretty much begging for it to not happen. There were good arguments against it, too. With America joining the war, maybe the French army could rest up for a while until the American forces would arrive. I mean, Germany certainly wasn't going on the offensive. They just this week finished retreating to a new, improved defensive line. The uncertainty in ally Russia was another thing. Painlevé was so sure of disaster that he tried to resign from the cabinet, but he was refused. Nivelle, for his part, said that if he couldn't proceed with the offensive, then he would resign. Poincaré knew that if the popular hero Nivelle resigned, it would mean the fall of yet another government, and gave him the green light. Nivelle's offensive included the British opening the attack at Arras. Nivelle's plan had been for the British Third Army to attack south of Vimy Ridge on April 9th and break through the German lines towards Cambrai. This would be followed by a massive French attack on the 16th at the Chemin des Dames once the British had pulled in the German reserves. British commander Sir Douglas Haig had extended the Arras attack to include an assault on Vimy Ridge itself by the Canadian Corps, claiming, correctly, that he couldn't really go forward and leave this fortress in his rear. The Canadian Corps was part of Henry Horne's First Army, and he is truly the unknown general of World War I. He never wrote an autobiography or memoirs. He kept no diary. He had no biographer. He isn't even mentioned that often in the dispatches from the time. His wife even destroyed his letters. This is a shame because he was a fairly good commander. Anyhow, the Canadian Corps commander Julian Byng had spent the winter working out tactics for storming the ridge. He'd even sent his 1st Division commander Arthur Currie to study the French and German tactics from Verdun and figure out what worked and what didn't work. While pondering the problems, the Canadians mounted a series of trench raids and mining operations that gave them a fairly detailed overview of the enemy positions, though at the cost of considerable casualties. Plans had been drawn up and debated during the winter, but of course, they all had to change because of the German retreat. Although fortunately for Nivelle, the Hindenburg Line, as the Allies called the new defensive system, stopped short of the Chemin des Dames and also of the Arras sector. It pretty much bisected the ground between them. Unfortunately for Nivelle, the defenses of the Chemin des Dames had been built up for 2.5 years and were among the strongest on the whole front, and even had commanding views over the French rear. Also, the roads and railways behind the French ran the wrong way, side to side, and not up to the front. The Germans, knowing what was coming, had beefed up their manpower at the Chemin des Dames from 9 to 38 divisions. Nivelle just thought that was more to destroy. There would be a 5-day preliminary barrage, and Haig would have Edmund Allenby's Third Army attack on a 10-mile front supported by 1,700 big guns. They would also use 40 Mark I tanks in the assault. The attack would break through the Hindenburg Line and advance on Cambrai. Horn's First Army, attacking to the north at the same time, was to take Vimy Ridge. There was a precise timetable for everything. The German first line was to be taken in 36 minutes. The men would remain there until +2 hours when the big guns had been brought up. Then take the second line at +2 hours and 45 minutes. They would consolidate there until 6 hours and 40 minutes and then take the Fouchy strong point by +8 hours. This was all a 4.5-mile advance. Once this had happened, the Cavalry Corps would exploit the success. Now, if you add in the Canadian Corps and First Army big guns, you get 2,817 total artillery pieces, which was like 1,800 more than the Germans had. But the Germans had solid, experienced troops, and the defensive line facing Allenby was pretty hardcore. The British official history describes the defenses of the Arras-Cambrai road as a veritable fortress, and that would be the axis of Allenby's advance. Also, the tanks were unreliable still, would start from up to a mile behind the infantry, and they had a serious tendency to break down before even reaching the starting line. The British did have air power, 9 squadrons of between 16 and 24 planes for bombing, artillery spotting, photography, and the like, with Sopwith pups, FE-2s, BE-2s, the premiering Bristol F-2B, and the new SE-5s, which, though very limited in number, were one of the fastest aircraft of the whole war. Thing is, toward the end of the Battle of the Somme 6 months ago, air superiority had swung back to the Germans and their new Albatros fighters. The Germans were outnumbered in the air, though, and had adopted a defensive strategy that went so far as to forbid planes to fly beyond their own front lines. This meant that when they had engine failure, which was common, they could glide down and be back in the air the next day, while for the Allies, that often meant becoming a POW. The deceased German flying ace Oswald Belke had set up a system to save fighter pilot strength, with good communication with the front lines, so fighters would usually only fly when there were targets, and they flew in packs, so they had local air superiority when they did fly. Last year, he had organized the first Jagdstaffel, Jasta, a dedicated fighter squadron, and wrote his 7 rules for fighter pilots. By April 1917, the Red Baron himself was in charge of Jasta 11 in the Arras sector opposite the British. And they flew the Albatros D3 fighters, which gave them the performance edge over the British. We would soon see battles in the sky between the British offensive strategy versus the German defensive strategy. Here's a wee spoiler. This month would become known in Britain as Bloody April. Anyhow, the artillery barrage for the Battle of Arras began at 6:30 on the morning of April 4th and continued for the rest of the week. And that's where the week ends, with preparations for 2 major offensives on the Western Front underway. Also this week, the first Portuguese troops reached the trenches, and on the Mesopotamian front, where the British had been advancing, British and Russian forces were now in touch at Kizil Robat. And the United States joined the war. Would that be a big deal? It may, if they get troops over to Europe in force before the war can end. To train and equip 1 million or more men, and over 6 times that number were currently on just the Western Front, would take maybe a year, maybe more, and Germany planned on winning by then. The U-boats driving Britain out of the war, Lenin driving Russia out of the war, and the rest, that would take fighting, and that would take real dedication by this point. I'm going to end with a quote I found in Martin Gilbert's The First World War. Albert Einstein wrote to a friend on the 3rd about the extreme nationalism of the younger scientists. I am convinced we are dealing with a kind of epidemic of the mind. It can be compared with development at the time of the Martyrs, the Crusades, and witch burnings.
Good to see you.
All right, so we are now, as you see there, the United States has entered the war. They enter 1917, like this slide says. They're a little late to the party. But they are, it's like, it's kind of like a wrestling WWE tag team. Here to the United States, they get tagged in, and it's sayonara for the Germans. It's over. Gives the Allies a much needed psychological boost, fresh troops and materials. The Germans make one more gamble, which we'll talk about, but we'll stop it there. And what's coming up, like I said, Thursday, you're going to get a prompt and a little bit of an explanation on how to write an essay, which we'll more than likely do. The essay will be due probably Monday, and that's the only thing you'll have to do on Thursday. There won't be anything due Friday. Friday, the only thing to do will be to take a quiz. So Thursday and Friday are pretty light days, but your essay is something you want to work on in those 2 days and over the weekend. So be kind of like a similar 5-paragraph essay we've written, I should say, several times. All right, take care, and I will catch you guys on the flip side. Whenever I can figure out how to end this quickly.